My parents crashed my house, closing demanding to be added to the deed of the first home I ever bought. I was signing papers when they barged in like they owned the place. What happened next? Destroyed them completely. Hey Reddit, my parents showed up uninvited to my house closing, demanding their names on the deed of a home they didn't pay a single cent for. I was holding the pen over my signature line when they walked in expecting ownership. What followed was the most satisfying scorched earth moment of my life. Buckle up because this gets wild. I'm Brett, 32 male, and I need to start by explaining exactly what kind of people my parents are. Not the sanitized version you tell coworkers, but the raw truth about two individuals who treated having a kid like making an investment they expected dividends on for life. Picture this. September 14th, 2023. I'm sitting in a title company office in downtown Denver, about to close on my first house. Not an apartment, not a condo, but an actual house with a yard and a mortgage and everything that comes with being a real adult. I'm talking about a modest 3-bedroom ranch in Washington Park. Nothing fancy, but in this market, the $850,000 price tag felt like robbery compared to what similar properties were going for. I'd just turned 32 2 months earlier, finally pulling in $214,000 annually as a senior logistics coordinator for a major energy company based in the Denver Tech Center. The job was demanding but paid well, and after years of grinding, I'd saved up enough for a solid down payment. The house itself was classic 1950s Denver. Red brick exterior, original hardwood floors that just needed refinishing, a finished basement I planned to convert into a home office, and a backyard that faced west toward the mountains. After years of throwing away $2,800 monthly on rentals, with paper-thin walls and neighbors who treated every night like New Year's Eve, this felt like the finish line. I'd worked 14 straight years since turning 18 to get here. No family money, no trust fund, no rich uncle leaving me a windfall. Just pure hustle, smart decisions, and refusing to quit even when things got brutal. The title agent, a professional woman in her late 40s with reading glasses and a no-nonsense attitude, had just handed me the final documents when it happened. The door to the conference room burst open. No knock, no announcement, just the door slamming against the wall like someone was raiding the place. My mother waddled in first. At 59, she'd perfected this expression somewhere between fake cheerfulness and barely concealed resentment. She was carrying a bottle of cheap sparkling wine, the kind you find at gas stations for $9, holding it up like she'd brought Dom Perignon to celebrate with me. My father trailed behind at 62, hands shoved in the pockets of cargo shorts that had stains I didn't want to identify. His eyes were already scanning the room with that calculating look he got whenever he was sizing something up for potential profit. They didn't wait for introductions or acknowledgement that they'd just crashed a private business meeting. Mom plopped the bottle on the closing table like she was delivering the crown jewels. "Congratulations, honey! We heard from your cousin on Facebook that you're buying a house. This is huge news." Dad nodded, already pulling out his cracked phone screen to apparently document this moment. "Yeah, kid, really proud of you. Now about the deed, though. We figured since we're family, you should add us as joint tenants. You know, for protection, in case something happens to you." The title agent froze mid-sentence, her pen hovering over a form she'd been reviewing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees. I just stared at them. The whole office smelled like stale coffee and whatever cheap perfume my mother had been wearing since I was a teenager. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Time seemed to slow down as my brain tried to process what had just happened. "Excuse me?" I said, keeping my voice way calmer than I actually felt. Mom waved her hand dismissively, those acrylic nails she couldn't really afford clicking together. "Oh, come on, Brett. We've always talked about this. Family helps family, right? You wouldn't even be here without us raising you. And Denver real estate has gone up something like 42% since the start of things. Really smart to have our names on the property, too. That way, if something happens to you, it stays in the family where it belongs." Dad leaned forward on the table like he already owned part of the place. "Exactly. And honestly, son, we've been struggling lately. My back's been terrible since that injury years ago. Still waiting on disability approval. The payments on our RV are eating us alive. This could really help secure our retirement." I actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and cuts through nonsense like a hot knife. The title agent cleared her throat and excused herself, practically running out of the room to check on some paperwork. That's when the masks came completely off. Mom's fake smile vanished instantly. Her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that could spot a clearance sale from 50 yards away, narrowed into slits. "Don't play games, Brett. We know exactly how much you make. Your cousin showed us that LinkedIn post about your promotion last quarter. 214,000 plus stock options and bonuses. You really think you get to keep all that after everything we sacrificed for you? Dad jumped in, voice rising with that entitled edge I'd heard my whole life. We raised you for 18 years. That's at least $388,000 in today's dollars, and that's being conservative. Just food, clothes, and basic shelter. You owe us, son. This is how you pay it back. There it was. The ledger. The running tab they'd been keeping since the day I was born. Let me take you back so you understand exactly what kind of people I'm dealing with here. I was 6 years old when my mother first gave me the speech about how much my existence cost them. It was Christmas 1997. I'd asked for a PlayStation like the other kids at school had. Instead, I got a used Game Boy Color, not even new, used, and a 3-hour lecture about financial responsibility and how much raising a child actually costs. She had a notebook, an actual spiral notebook where she tracked every expense related to me. Food, clothes, school supplies, haircuts. Everything had a price tag and was added to my invisible debt. By the time I was 12 and asked if I could play soccer, my dad sat me down with a calculator and showed me line by line how much they'd invested in me versus what kids in foster care got for free. The cleats I wanted? Too expensive. But more importantly, I should be grateful for what I already had, because most kids didn't get what I got. At 15, I started mowing lawns in the neighborhood to earn my own money. Every dollar I made went into what they called Brett's College Fund, a savings account in my name that they controlled. By the time I needed SAT prep books and application fees, that account had mysteriously been emptied. The money had gone to other important family expenses that were never explained. They weren't actually poor, by the way. That's the thing that makes this whole situation even more infuriating. Dad had started collecting Social Security at 62, $41,200 annually from early retirement. Mom worked part-time as a cashier at the local grocery store, making around $18,000 yearly, though she constantly threatened to quit because her feet hurt, and the managers were always on her case about nothing. They owned their house in Aurora outright, a place they'd bought in 1998 for $142,000 that was now worth close to $380,000 in the current market. But they refused to downsize or tap that equity because property values always go up and we might need it someday. Instead, in 2019, they took out a $72,000 loan at nearly 9% interest to buy a ridiculous RV. Their reasoning? We deserve to see America before we die. Meanwhile, during my college years, I was eating ramen noodles 4 nights a week while working 36 hours weekly at a retail job and carrying 18 credit hours. I graduated debt-free only because I hustled for every scholarship and grant I could find. Applications they never helped me fill out, deadlines they never reminded me about, essays they never proofread. Every achievement in my life came with a side of resentment from them. Good grades? Well, school was always easy for you. Got into a good college? Must be nice having those opportunities we never had. Landed my first real job? Hope you remember who raised you when those paychecks start coming in. The financial manipulation never stopped. It just evolved into something more sophisticated. After college, when I got my first apartment, they'd call with emergencies every few months. Each call followed the same script. The car needed repairs they couldn't afford. Always something catastrophic like a transmission or engine work. Medical bills they couldn't pay. Co-pays and prescriptions that somehow always landed during the exact week I got my paycheck. The RV payment was late, and they were facing repossession. This happened at least 4 times a year, despite me knowing they received consistent Social Security deposits. Each time, they'd guilt me into sending money I could barely spare. Money that disappeared into their black hole of poor financial decisions, without any accountability or gratitude beyond a perfunctory text message. I kept track, though. Every dollar I sent them over the years, I documented in a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and their stated reasons. By the time I was 30, I'd given them close to $28,000 in emergency loans that were never repaid and never even acknowledged as loans. $28,000 that could have been my house down payment years earlier. The worst part? Watching them post photos on social media of restaurant dinners, new purchases, casino trips with friends, all while claiming poverty to me. They'd eat at steakhouses on Friday, then call me Monday morning, saying they couldn't afford groceries. The disconnect between their lifestyle and their claimed financial situation was staggering. When I finally stopped sending money around age 29, the calls got nastier. Dad started leaving voicemails about family loyalty and how I'd turned my back on them. Mom would send long texts about how hurt she was that I didn't care if they suffered. My extended family started getting involved. Aunts and uncles calling to lecture me about helping my struggling parents. None of them knew the full story, of course. Just the version my parents told them about their ungrateful son who made good money, but refused to help his poor, struggling parents. The reality that I'd already given them more than I could afford while they squandered it never made it into those conversations. But this moment, sitting in that title office with them demanding to be added to my deed, this was different. This wasn't a request for help. This was a straight-up robbery attempt disguised as family obligation. The title agent peeked back into the room cautiously, and I held up my hand. Give me 5 minutes. Mom wasn't done with her performance, though. She leaned forward, that overwhelming perfume making my eyes water. Here's how this works, Brett. You add us to the deed today, or we make this very difficult for you. We know lawyers. Cheap ones, maybe, but lawyers nonetheless. We'll file complaints, contest everything, make your life miserable. Remember what happened with your cousin when she tried buying that condo? She was referring to my cousin on Dad's side, who'd bought property 2 years earlier. My parents had harassed her with fake HOA complaints and forged letters until she broke down and added her mother to the deed just to make them stop. They were proud of that story, brought it up at family gatherings like it was something to brag about. Dad pulled out what he thought was the nuclear option. And don't forget about your grandmother's money. We know she left you something in that trust. Your mother has blood rights to that inheritance. We can fight this in court. That's when I smiled, really smiled for the first time since they'd walked in, because they had no idea what was actually coming. My grandmother, Dad's mother actually, was named Dorothy Campbell. Born in 1937 in rural Colorado during the tail end of the Depression, she'd come to Denver in 1962 with $400 to her name, a third-grade education, and determination that could move mountains. She'd spent 40 years cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods of Cherry Creek and Hilltop, making a living wage while being treated like she was invisible by the people whose toilets she scrubbed and whose floors she mopped. I remember her telling me stories about those early years. How she'd take 2 buses to get to work because she couldn't afford a car. How she'd bring her lunch in a paper bag because buying food in Cherry Creek cost more than she made in an hour. How the wealthy families would leave cash on the counter instead of handing it to her directly, like physical contact with the help might somehow taint them. But Grandma Dorothy was smart, really smart in ways that had nothing to do with formal education. She watched those wealthy families closely, listened to their conversations about investments and real estate while she cleaned their kitchens, read their discarded Wall Street journals while taking out their trash, taught herself about property values and market trends using their own abandoned resources. She bought her first duplex in the Five Points neighborhood in 1978 for $48,000 cash, money she'd saved literally in coffee cans hidden around her tiny apartment because she didn't trust banks after growing up during the Depression. That duplex generated rental income that she lived on while saving every other penny from her cleaning jobs, refusing to touch the principal. The wealthy families she worked for thought she was just another uneducated cleaning lady. They had no idea she was building an empire one property at a time, while they spent their inherited wealth on things that depreciated. Over the next 37 years, she bought, renovated, and flipped properties across Denver. She learned to spot undervalued neighborhoods before they gentrified, knew which areas were about to boom based on infrastructure development and business investment patterns she observed. By 2015, she owned 11 properties scattered across the city, all paid off completely, worth a combined $4.8 million when she passed away in March 2018. She'd accomplished more with a third-grade education and a mop than my parents had accomplished with every advantage I'd never had. My mother had been counting on that inheritance since Grandma's first cancer diagnosis in 2014. I'd overheard the conversations, Mom and Dad discussing how they'd split the money, what they'd buy first, how their financial problems would finally be over. But Grandma Dorothy saw right through them. She'd watched how they treated me my entire childhood, watched them keep a ledger of how much my existence cost, watched them guilt me for having basic needs, watched them take credit for my achievements while simultaneously resenting that I'd succeeded. 6 weeks before she died in February 2018, at 80 years old and sharp as ever despite the cancer, she called her estate attorney. His name was Walter Harrison, a guy who'd handled her property transactions for decades and who she trusted completely. Together, they set up an irrevocable trust, $1.2 million in cash and securities, to be held in trust and dispersed to me on my 30th birthday, July 2021. The remaining properties would be sold, with proceeds split between 3 charities she'd supported for years, and my cousin on mom's side who had actually spent time with her during her final years. My parents were left exactly $1 each, the legal minimum required to prevent contest claims that the will was invalid due to accidentally forgetting someone. They tried to contest it anyway, spent $38,000 on a probate lawyer who took their money and accomplished absolutely nothing. The judge threw out their case in 22 minutes, citing clear evidence that Grandma had been of sound mind and had made her wishes explicitly clear. The 20% down payment on my house, that $170,000 check I'd written, came directly from that trust disbursement when I turned 30. Sitting there in the title office, watching my parents try to intimidate me into adding them to my deed, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying every single day since the closing date was set. Cream-colored paper with a gold seal from Harrison and Associates law firm. "This," I said calmly, placing it on the table between us like laying down a royal flush, "is why you will never ever touch this house or anything else I own." Mom snatched the envelope first, her acrylic nails tearing into it while Dad crowded over her shoulder. Page 1. Irrevocable Trust of Dorothy Campbell. Beneficiary, Brett Thomas Campbell only. Page 2 contained the clause that Grandma had specifically added after my parents tried to move into her house in 2017 under the guise of taking care of her. The language was simple and devastating. In the event my son Richard Campbell or his wife Patricia Campbell attempt to interfere with, contest, or make any claim against this trust or any assets purchased using trust funds, including but not limited to real property, they shall be deemed to have predeceased me for all purposes of distribution. Page 3 detailed how the $170,000 down payment could be traced directly to the trust, making the property completely untouchable under the no contest clause. Mom's face went from red to purple to almost white in the span of 10 seconds. "This is fake! Your grandmother would never... She wouldn't do this to her own family." "Call Walter Harrison," I said, sliding his business card across the table. "He's expecting another call from you, actually. Though I should mention he's charging $400 an hour for consultation now." Dad exploded, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to make the paperwork jump. "You manipulative little..." He caught himself barely. "You poisoned her against us. Turned her against her own son." "Actually," I said, my voice deadly calm, "she poisoned herself against you. Remember Christmas 2016 when you told her that if she didn't add you to her property deeds, you'd have her declared incompetent and put in a nursing home? She recorded that conversation. It's Exhibit C in the trust documentation." The color drained from both their faces like someone had pulled a plug. The title agent came back in, her professional mask firmly in place, but her eyes showing she'd heard everything through the door. "Mr. Campbell, are we proceeding with closing today? Just your name on the title as originally planned?" "Yes," I said, picking up the pen with a flourish. "Brett Thomas Campbell, sole owner." I signed my name on every document that needed a signature. Each stroke of the pen felt like freedom. Mom started crying, those practiced sobs she'd perfected over decades of manipulating people. The kind that sound genuine until you've heard them 1,000 times and realize they only come out when she's not getting her way. "How can you do this to your own mother? After I carried you for 9 months? After everything we sacrificed?" "You carried me for 9 months," I replied, still signing paperwork without looking up. "Then spent the next 32 years trying to collect interest on that investment. Consider the account closed." They left about 20 minutes later after the title agent had security escort them from the building. I could hear Mom screaming in the parking lot about elder abuse and threatening to sue everyone in sight. I walked out of that office with keys to my house, jangling in my pocket. The title agent shook my hand and quietly said, "Congratulations. And for what it's worth, you handled that better than most people would have." That night, I walked through my empty house. No furniture yet, just echoes and possibilities. I stood in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and pink, and felt lighter than I had in years. But of course, this being my parents, the story doesn't end there. 3 months later, on December 28th, 2023, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a process server holding papers. My parents were suing me. The lawsuit was absolutely insane. They claimed I'd exercised undue influence over Grandma Dorothy, that she'd been senile and incompetent when she signed the trust documents, that the entire trust was invalid and should be thrown out. They wanted the court to declare that my house had been purchased with fraudulent funds and force its sale, with proceeds split 3 ways between them and me. They'd found a lawyer willing to take the case on contingency, some guy who advertised on bus benches and had a 1-800 number. The hearing was set for June 11th, 2024, in Arapahoe County Court. I hired Walter Harrison for $15,000 to defend the case. Money well spent, as it turned out. The months leading up to the hearing were a masterclass in harassment that would have impressed a professional stalker. My parents sent certified letters weekly, thick envelopes that required my signature, each one filled with increasingly desperate and contradictory claims. One week, I was a manipulative monster who'd brainwashed Grandma. The next week, I was a confused young man who didn't understand the complexity of family obligations. They couldn't keep their story straight, but they kept the pressure constant. They left voicemails that ranged from apologetic sobbing to outright threats. Mom would call from unknown numbers. I'd block one, and she'd call from another the next day, leaving messages about how this was killing her, how she couldn't sleep, how the stress was destroying her health. Dad would follow up with angry rants about how I was destroying the family legacy and would regret this for the rest of my life. The Facebook group they created, Justice for Richard and Patricia, was simultaneously hilarious and disturbing. They posted their version of events multiple times daily, painting me as an evil grandson who'd stolen their rightful inheritance through manipulation and lies. My mother wrote these long, rambling posts about how Grandma Dorothy had always loved her son, but I'd poisoned that relationship in the final years. The group attracted about 30 members, mostly distant relatives and family friends who didn't know the full story. They'd comment with support and outrage, sharing posts about elder abuse and inheritance theft. Someone even started a petition demanding I return the stolen inheritance to its rightful owners. It got 11 signatures before being taken down for violating terms of service. They contacted my employer claiming I was embezzling funds, a serious accusation that triggered an immediate internal investigation. The company's security team spent 2 days auditing my expense reports, financial transactions, and email history before concluding the claims were completely baseless. My manager apologized for having to investigate me, but I understood they had no choice given the formal nature of the complaint. They filed complaints with the Bar Association against Walter Harrison, claiming he'd committed fraud by helping Grandma Dorothy disinherit her own family. The Bar Association dismissed the complaint after reviewing the trust documents and Dorothy's video testimony, but not before Walter had to spend billable hours responding to their nonsense. The most brazen attempt came when they contacted my mortgage lender directly, claiming the down payment came from fraudulent sources and the loan should be rescinded. They actually submitted evidence, printouts of Facebook posts, and handwritten timelines they'd created. The mortgage company's fraud department reviewed everything and sent me a letter saying they'd found no irregularities in my application, but wanted to make me aware of the complaint for my records. My dad even tried reaching out to colleagues in my industry, spinning some story about how I'd stolen family money to fund my lifestyle. I found out when a professional contact mentioned it casually over coffee. "Hey, your dad called me last week. Seemed really upset about something. Everything okay?" I had to explain the entire situation to someone I barely knew professionally, just to protect my reputation. Every single attempt failed spectacularly, but they kept trying, because that's what parasites do when their host finally breaks free. They'd latched onto my success for so long that they couldn't comprehend a reality where that gravy train had permanently left the station. June 11th, 2024, arrived with typical Colorado weather. 87 degrees with smoke from wildfires making everything hazy, and the air tastes like ash. The courthouse was in downtown Littleton, a modern building with metal detectors and board security guards who'd seen every flavor of family dysfunction imaginable. My parents showed up looking pathetic on purpose. Mom wore a $39 dress from the clearance rack, her hair freshly dyed that unnatural black color she thought made her look younger. Dad had squeezed into a too-small suit from Walmart that strained across his considerable frame. They were playing the struggling elderly parents card for all it was worth. Their lawyer started strong, I'll give him that. Painted a picture of a confused, dying woman being manipulated by a calculating grandson who isolated her from her real family. He brought up how few times I'd visited compared to how much time I'd spent with her near the end, implying I'd swooped in just to secure the inheritance. Then Walter Harrison stood up and systematically destroyed every single argument. First, medical records. Grandma Dorothy's oncologist testified via video deposition that she'd scored 29 out of 30 on her last cognitive assessment just 3 weeks before signing the trust documents. Perfect cognition, zero signs of dementia or impairment. Second, visitor logs from the assisted living facility where Grandma had spent her final year. I'd visited 187 times in those 12 months. My parents? 4 times total. And 3 of those visits had been to demand she help them with money problems. Third, bank records showing my mother had withdrawn $8,400 from Grandma's account in 2017, using a power of attorney, one that Grandma revoked the very next day after discovering what had happened. But the real nuclear bomb came last. Grandma Dorothy had recorded a video on her iPhone in January 2018, 2 months before she died. The phone had been propped up on her bedside table while she was going through chemo, and she'd recorded a 15-minute message addressed to whoever needs to hear this in court. Walter played it on the courtroom monitor. There was my grandmother, weakened from treatment but with fire still in her eyes, speaking directly to the camera. If my son Richard and his wife Patricia are watching this, it means they're trying to steal from Brett. Let me be crystal clear about something. They've been parasites their entire adult lives. I worked 60-hour weeks cleaning houses so my family wouldn't have to struggle. I saved every penny, invested smart, and built something real. Those two spent their lives on the couch making excuses and keeping score of what everyone owed them. She paused to catch her breath, the oxygen tube visible in her nose. Brett earned every penny I left him by being the one person in this family who worked for what he got, instead of demanding handouts. He visited me because he actually cared, not because he was calculating his inheritance. He's the only one who reminds me of how I used to be, hungry, determined, refusing to quit. If Richard and Patricia are in court trying to take this away from him, then I hope the judge throws them out on their entitled backsides. The courtroom was dead silent when the video ended. The judge, Honorable Margaret Stevens, a woman in her mid-50s who'd clearly seen every family drama imaginable, didn't even need to deliberate. Case dismissed with prejudice. The court finds this action was filed entirely in bad faith. Plaintiffs are ordered to pay defendants legal fees of $18,200 within 30 days. Additionally, due to the no contest clause being violated, any and all remaining claims against the Dorothy Campbell estate are permanently barred. She looked directly at my parents over her reading glasses. I've been on this bench for 19 years. I've seen greedy people, desperate people, confused people, but rarely have I seen two people so determined to profit from their own child's success while contributing absolutely nothing themselves. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell, your lawsuit was frivolous. Your claims were without merit, and frankly, you should be embarrassed. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with finality. Mom collapsed in her chair, crying real tears this time. Tears of a woman realizing she'd gambled everything and lost. Dad just sat there staring at the floor, mouth opening and closing, like he wanted to say something but couldn't form words. Outside the courthouse, where June heat made everything shimmer, Mom tried one last manipulation. The snow from last winter's record dump had finally melted, but somehow the air still felt cold when she approached me on the courthouse steps. Brett, please. The RV got repossessed last month. We're living in an extended stay motel. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. Don't you have any compassion? I looked at her, really looked at this woman who'd made me wear the same jeans 3 days in a row during middle school to save on laundry costs. Who'd told me at 16 that if I got a girl pregnant, she'd make sure I supported the child alone while they kept their money for emergencies. Who'd spent my college fund on a timeshare in Missouri? You made your choices, I said quietly. Every single day for 32 years. This is just the consequence of those choices finally catching up. I walked away and didn't look back. The rest of 2024 was peaceful in ways I'd never experienced before. Not just the absence of drama, but actual peace that came from knowing I'd finally cut out the rot that had been poisoning my life for 3 decades. That fall, I finished renovations on the house that had become more than just a building. It was proof that I could build something lasting without their involvement. I spent $42,000 on a complete kitchen remodel with granite counters, custom cabinetry, and that 6-burner gas range I'd dreamed about since watching cooking shows as a kid. The kitchen became my favorite room, the place where I'd make Sunday dinners that filled the house with smells of food cooked with care rather than obligation. Built a deck for $28,000 that gave me those mountain views I'd been chasing since I first moved to Denver. I'd spend mornings out there with coffee, watching the sunrise paint the peaks orange and pink, feeling gratitude for a view my parents would never share because they'd burned that bridge themselves. Each improvement felt like building my life on a foundation that was actually stable. The house became a reflection of who I was without their constant criticism and demands. Organized, thoughtfully designed, invested in for the long term, rather than bled dry for short-term convenience. My younger sister Jenny moved into the basement apartment after graduating from nursing school. I let her stay rent-free while she saved up for her own place, something our parents would never have done for either of us, without attaching strings and keeping a ledger of what we owed them. Jenny and I had always been close despite the chaos of our upbringing. She'd been 12 when I left for college, and I'd tried to shield her from the worst of our parents' dysfunction, even though I was barely keeping my own head above water. Now, with both of us adults and free from their manipulation, we could finally build the sibling relationship we'd never been allowed to have. We'd sit on that deck drinking coffee and talking about everything except them. She told me stories about nursing school, the difficult patients, the amazing mentors, the career she was building through actual hard work. I'd tell her about work projects, home improvement plans, the life I was creating. Sometimes we'd talk about our childhood, but always in the past tense, like discussing ancient history rather than wounds that were still healing. She'd cut contact with our parents too, after seeing how the lawsuit went down, after watching them try to destroy me in court, after realizing that blood relation didn't make someone family if they couldn't show basic human decency. I used to think I was the problem, she admitted one evening while we were grilling on the new deck. Like if I was just better somehow, they'd love me the way parents are supposed to love their kids. Then I watched what they tried to do to you and realized it was never about us. They're just broken people who shouldn't have had children. That conversation meant more to me than she probably realized. Knowing I wasn't alone in that experience, that someone else had lived through the same dysfunction and come out the other side, made the isolation of those years feel less consuming. In November 2024, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. Mom's handwriting, shaky and desperate. Brett, we're being evicted December 1st. Your father is in the hospital with chest pains, and we have $47,000 in medical bills. We know we made mistakes, but we're still your parents. Just $25,000 to get an apartment and help with medical costs. For your grandmother's sake, please. I read it twice while sitting in my home office, the one I'd built in the finished basement with that gorgeous desk I'd custom ordered. Then I took it to the fireplace, a beautiful stone fireplace I'd installed for $12,000, and watched the paper curl and blacken while the fire consumed it. Some fires destroy things, others cleanse them. 18 months later, in March 2026, I married Kelly, a third-grade teacher from Park Hill with freckles and a laugh that could light up a room. We got married in my backyard under the aspen trees I'd planted, their leaves just starting to bud with spring growth. Jenny was my best woman. My cousin who'd actually cared for Grandma Dorothy flew in from New Mexico. Not a single toxic relative got an invitation. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet except for Kelly's breathing and our dog sleeping at the foot of the bed, I think about September 14th, 2023. How close I came to letting them guilt me into giving up even a piece of what I'd earned. But Grandma Dorothy's voice still rings clear in my memory. You earned this by not becoming them. The mortgage is paid off now. Extra principal payments from work bonuses made that happen 2 years early. The trust fund has grown to $1.8 million through conservative investments. I volunteer coaching youth sports and mentor kids from broken homes through a local nonprofit that teaches financial literacy. I'm living the life my parents said was impossible unless I helped family by sacrificing my own future for their comfort. And every single time I turn my key in that lock, my door, my house, I smile. Because some people don't just take out the trash. They burn the whole dumpster and build something beautiful on the ashes. The extended family has gotten very quiet over the past 2 years. Nobody asks me to family gatherings anymore, which suits me fine. The few relatives who've reached out have done so to quietly apologize for not speaking up sooner about my parents' behavior. Apparently everyone saw it, but nobody wanted to get involved. My parents are still alive as far as I know, living in some subsidized housing in Aurora, surviving on Dad's Social Security and whatever help they can get from the few relatives who still take their calls. Someone told me Dad tried to get a reverse mortgage on their house, but got denied because his credit is destroyed from the lawsuit costs and unpaid debts. Mom supposedly tried to write a tell-all post on Facebook about her ungrateful son, but it got taken down when someone reported it as harassment. I don't check on them. Don't ask about them. Don't send Christmas cards or birthday wishes. They wanted to treat family like a balance sheet? Fine. The account is closed, and they're permanently in the red. Kelly sometimes asks if I ever think about reconciling. She's got parents who actually love her unconditionally, the kind who show up to everything, who celebrate her successes without resentment, who help without keeping score. She doesn't quite understand what it's like to be raised by people who see you as an investment rather than a human being. But she's trying to understand, which is more than I can say for most people. I tell her the truth. Some relationships aren't worth salvaging. Some people will drain you dry if you let them, and the only way to survive is to cut them off completely before they bleed you out entirely. She struggled with that concept at first. Came from a loving home where conflicts got resolved through honest communication and mutual respect. The idea that parents could be so fundamentally broken that they weren't worth the effort to repair things didn't compute in her worldview. Then I showed her some of the old letters and messages from before the lawsuit, the guilt trips, the threats, the careful manipulation disguised as concern. Her exact words after reading through just a sample were, "These people are absolutely insane." "They're not insane," I'd corrected her. "They're just completely self-absorbed and entitled. Insanity would almost be easier to forgive because it wouldn't be a choice. They chose to be this way every single day for decades." She gets it now. Doesn't push anymore about potential reconciliation or family healing. Accepted that some wounds don't heal, they just become scars you learn to live with. Last month, I got a LinkedIn message from my dad's sister, an aunt I haven't spoken to in years. She wanted to let me know that dad had a heart attack, but survived. She thought I should know in case I wanted to reach out and extend an olive branch during this difficult time. The message was carefully worded to make me feel guilty without directly saying I should feel guilty. Classic family manipulation technique that I'd grown immune to over the years. I read the message 3 times, considered my response carefully, then deleted it without replying. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.